Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach and welcome to a bit of a mini-series I'm going to be doing over the next 3 weeks. Got to give credit to Reese Knight who commented this idea, and it has been sort of brought up to an extent before, but certainly I was reading through the comments, and thanks to everyone who has been commenting. There's been quite a bit of engagement already, which is good to see. I will look to do some sort of Q&A stuff throughout the pre-season as well, so that's something to keep an eye out for. But yeah, thanks Reese for the idea in terms of doing a bit of a sort of, I've changed slightly on your suggestion, but the format's pretty much the same. So it's basically going to be club previews to an extent. I used to do club previews, but they were probably a bit long-winded and weren't quite exact. So I want these to be quite punchy, short and sharp. I'm going to talk about from each club. We'll go through alphabetically. We're going to go a lock, a risk, a breakout potential player, and a guy that's no chance of me picking him. And I think the lock's self-explanatory. The risk is probably a player that you might think about, has been a bit iffy in the past, or just someone that comes, obviously, with a fair bit of risk. The breakout contender's pretty obvious. And the no chance guy, probably someone who's burnt me in the past, or just someone who's maybe been relevant, about to fall off a cliff. I won't just be picking some obvious, Prestige Como style of setup. But look, we'll start with Adelaide and work our way through the clubs. I want to keep them somewhat short and sharp, but I do have a history of rambling on, so I make no promises. So club preview with a little bit more punch. So thanks to everyone who's been commenting away, and let's take a look at the Crows. Now, the lock, I've got Rory Laird. Now, obviously last year, like many other Crows, wasn't his finest, but I'm sticking by him. I like him. He plays such a SuperCoach-friendly role, and I can't see that changing. I know a fair bit will change at Adelaide, but I don't see Laird's role changing much at all. If anything, they might look to inject his ball use and a bit of speed higher up the ground. Back end of the year wasn't his greatest. As I said, the Crows had a year to forget. Now, overall, he averaged 96.8. Leading up to that, the previous seasons, 2018 was 108.2, 100.2 before that, 96.8, and 93.8 in his breakout of 2015. So he was going all right, sort of up into the bye, sort of mid to high 90s, and then it just, it didn't go too badly wrong, but he averaged 93.2 in the last 9 games after the bye, which, is solid numbers, but not exactly elite, or certainly not what we've been used to from Laird. But I'm sticking by him. I reckon he'll be back, and I'm certainly still putting him in that lock category. And to be fair, the Crows aren't exactly showing a lot of faith in terms of players that we can pick with confidence, because a fair bit is changing. But I've locked in Laird there. Player with a bit of risk. Now, I've got a couple of guys here. Tom Duday is probably one fella. And a shout out to Jono, who passed on his price. I'm not a SuperCoach Gold guy at the moment, so I know the team picker came out the other day. I'll look to get my hands on in some way, shape or form, or maybe I'll just be patient. We'll wait and see. But Duday priced at $273. Now, obviously, he had the big injury that saw him play just a 1 game last year. He'll be discounted price, as I mentioned. 82.2 in 2018. Really found his niche. He was a great cash cow in that year, and certainly found that intercepting role really comfortable. At this point in time, I'd say he's probably too risky. He's probably not a guy I'm really considering. In my opinion, he's just not cheap enough given the lack of runs on the board. He's played sort of 21 games, I think, and I'm not going to make absolute yes or no calls on all of these guys, but I just want to sort of bring up a few players. For me, he's probably slightly too risky, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. And look, Bryce Gibbs, there's a name that you probably didn't think Shorty'd be throwing out there. Now, bear with me. I don't think anyone's realistically going to pick him, but just, some of these guys are good to keep in mind for your draft, even though it's a long way away. Gibbs averaged 69.1 last year, well below what we've seen for most of his career. He was getting dropped. He was out of favour. Obviously, a lot of change at Adelaide. And the talk is he will be playing more off a half-back flank, utilising his good ball use. Now, I think that is definitely his strength. He is a nice kick, handball receive type player. He's played a number of roles over his career, but look, prior to last year's disaster, and it was a disaster for the whole club, but Gibbs probably felt it the hardest at times. Prior to that, he'd averaged 96, 102 and 106. Now, look, he's about 31 now, so we're not expecting him to boost numbers over 100. But hey, there might be people just out there thinking, gee, Gibbs could just roll out back into the 90s. And hey, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not going to stuff around with my midfield. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be throwing Bryce Gibbs into my midfield. But some people like those type of options. And I really do think if we get that sort of halfback role and he is a ball user and they really look to go through him, that's a pretty easy role to play. Well, not easy role, but easy on the eye, SuperCoach friendly. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see a reasonable spike in Gibbs' numbers. Breakout, Wayne Miller. Now, if you really want some strong detail on this, check out my video where I talk about the 5 players I think that'll explode in 2020. He was one of those guys. I really like him as a breakout option. Whether I go with him or not, because there's only a certain amount of those types you can go with, that sort of mid-price type, take a risk. I reckon you can only go with about 2, mate. 1 to 3. You don't want to mess around too much. You really want to keep it with basically your premiums and rookies. And the mid-prices you go for, you want to be pretty bloody confident. But I really like him. 74.1 average last year. I think he'll get a much better and more precise role next year. He won't be thrown around back and forward and wing like we saw him last year. I think he'll certainly find a fair bit more stability on a wing and around the ball. And I think we'll see his average boost. And the bloke who's no chance, and he's one of my favourites, so it hurts me a touch, but it's Matt Crouch. Matt, yeah, not a chance for my side this year. Sorry, mate. Last year was tough. We had a rocky relationship, me and Matt. It started beautifully with a 138 off the top, and I'd spoken about him quite a bit, sort of a point of difference player for my midfield, talked about him a lot, and he started on fire. But it was pretty much downhill from there. Overall, he averaged 103.7. Had a big score later in the year. I think it was 161 and ended with a 134. But otherwise, it was slim pickings. 103.7 is not a bad average, but he has averaged 110 in the past, and that's what I was hoping for. He missed games throughout the season. It was just awkward. He was one of those guys where you go, probably shouldn't trade him, but then he's just not repaying the faith as you'd like. So, Matt, it's just not going to happen this year. And I think, ironically, one of the best representations of the frustration with Crouch last year was in one of his better games. In the last game of the year, he racked up 47 touches, 8 clearances, and scored 134. Now, 134 is a good score, but 47 touches. I don't know whether it's a bad habit he got into, or is it a flow-on effect of being in a struggling side? I don't know, but he just found much more outside cheap ball, sort of sideways kick action, handball at the back of the pack. SuperCoach points are all about the impact and influence on the game. Now, his numbers didn't change that much from his very best year, but it clearly was an impact thing, and his contested ball numbers were slightly down. But I just thought that last round really highlighted how Crouch is a bloke that needs 40 touches to really score well, at least in the manner he played last year, and that can be pretty tough. Unless you're Tom Mitchell, it's a tough way to go about it. So, sorry, Matt, it's not going to happen. But there you go. Let me know what your thoughts are on the Adelaide Crows. I'm not sure they have a stack of relevancy this season because they are going through a bit of a different phase, rebuilding, regeneration. There might be some opportunity for some guys, and that's what we're probably going to have to keep an eye on. But in terms of banking on absolute premiums, the likes of Sloan, the Crouch brothers, Laird's probably the only one I have a lot of confidence in, as I mentioned. So let me know what you think. I'll take a look at Brisbane next, so stay tuned for that. Cheers.